Okay, welcome everyone. It is another Cluster API Azure provider office hours meeting. We are part of SIG Cluster Lifecycle Kubernetes umbrella project, and therefore we comply with their standards of conduct, and which you can read about in our document, but it basically boils down to everybody be nice to each other and try and use the raise hand feature so that we don't talk over each other. If you have a second and you want to, please put your name in on the attendee list. Here, let me share screen. So, doing this correctly. Yeah, if you want to add your name to the attendees list, please do so. Does anybody want to unmute and introduce themselves who hasn't been here before?
I'll just take 30 seconds. I'm Mike Tugeron. I'm with Adobe. I've met a few of you over PRs or over Zoom before. Hoping to contribute more, not just to CAPZ, but to CAPI in general. We're hoping to adopt it more thoroughly at Adobe. Right now, we're just in kind of the POC stages, but we're hoping to move very rapidly from POC to production usage, hopefully within the next month or two.
Awesome. Welcome, Mike. Good to have you here.
Yeah, I see, Cecile, you put in the chat about the subnet deletion bug. If we want to chat about that, I got about 10 minutes left before I have to drop. I hate to interrupt any other introduction, but if we want to, you kind of got to do it.
That's the next thing is open discussion. So let's jump right into it then. Unless people have something else.
So quick update on that. I did a bunch of refactoring yesterday. I'm in the process of testing that this morning. I switched the approach that I'm using on it because I wasn't able to properly mock out the service to do the unit tests. So what I did was I switched the subnet spec, much like it has the VNet managed, where it's setting it at where the cluster creates it, and the managed cluster or managed control plane creates the subnets there. It already sets that property to the subnet spec. So I'm basically following that same approach now. I'll probably be pushing up a PR. I got a kid thing, so probably within the next 4 hours for review, if that works for you all. If not, we can always go with the other approach that Jack had done about just allowing the VNet to do the deletion instead. I'm really fine with either way, just because I've learned a lot taking this, trying to get this PR through. So I really defer to you all as to which approach you'd rather take on it.
Cool. I think they both work. I think so. Credit to Cecile for observing that subnets shouldn't be under our deletion enforcement at all. So that's really her idea. I think that that's the more elegant idea, but I think that we should merge the one that works first and that passes tests and everything. So if it sounds like yours is closer to that, so let's get that in so we can discuss ways to get that to your staging environment so you can actually validate it at scale. And then it'd be super easy to follow along with the deletion solution after the fact, which should be functionally equivalent.
Okay.
May I ask a meta question? So we actually have a pretty good turnout today. That's not always the case. Is this time good for folks? Because I would love to see good turnout week after week. We've been straddling PST, Pacific time, and European time, and it's really hard to find a good time. Is Mike, how likely are you to come week after week if this is the time we meet?
About every other week is good for me. Just because I also work with European folks, and so it's this is kind of the golden hour.
Right.
The 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific is always difficult times for it seems like everyone. But yeah, I have every other week meetings. It tends to be So it's really hit or miss for me, but I do want to make this a priority. So I'm going to try to make it as often as I can.
Terrific.
Cecile?
I guess, is there anyone for whom it wouldn't work at all if we were to move this, like, let's say 2 hours later, 3 hours, like a bit later in the morning, still in the morning, but just not 8 a.m. for Pacific?
How's that for you, Ashton?
Do you mean 2 hours early, Cecil? Like from the time that is now?
No, 2 hours later. So like just like a bit later, like 1-2 hours later.
Yeah, I mean, I can try to make it, but that means it will be something around 11:30 p.m. here.
Okay.
I am based out at IST time zone. So
Got it.
yeah, this time works the best for me.
Okay.
But let's see, what all of us have to say about it.
We could do another poll, but the last time we did a doodle, we all effectively agreed on this time again. So we could try again, but
But most of the people who voted for this time don't actually come. So
that's true.
maybe it's worth doing another round. Checking if this is still true.
In any event, it's great to see so many people.
Do we want to try another doodle poll or float the question on Slack or something, or just stick with this time? No strong preference is what I hear.
I think it'd be good just to check in at least what people's preferences are. Like this time works. It's just a bit early for Pacific. So if it allows, many community members to come that otherwise wouldn't be allowed to be able to come, that's great. But if it ends up being, mostly not working for people in the European time zone anyways, that's not good.
So do we want to float the question in Slack or try and move it an hour and see who shows up or something? Or just leave it as an open question? Not really sure what to do.
I think let's just start a thread in Slack and maybe a doodle. I don't. Would you be able to take that, Matt?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's not change it without asking people. But I mean, at this time works for everyone. We should just keep it. It just seems that, like Jack pointed out, generally we don't get very high attendance, and so it might not be the best time.
Interesting that Google Docs wants to correct my name. All right, well, I'll ask in Slack and we'll see if we get feedback. Maybe we can move it a little later. All right, next thing is import aliases. I just want to mention that we merged a PR that standardizes the import aliases for CAPI and CAPZ. They were already doing this in CAPI and Kappa and actually other projects, and we hadn't gotten that far. We have the linter in place, the import as linter, but we hadn't declared the rules. So Mateusz looked around the code base and noticed that we import some pretty important packages as just 6 or 7 different aliases. And so now we don't. I have a follow-up PR out there that actually turns on linting for some of our conversion and mock code, because there was actually a lot more variation there than anywhere else. So if we eventually merge that, then we'll have very standardized imports. TLDR, you may have to rebase a lot of stuff is the main take home from all this. Check.
Yeah, just in case there are folks here who don't understand what an import alias is, can you explain what an import alias is and what this
Sure.
all really means in practice? Because go ahead. If you
Yeah,
don't
I
mind.
mean, if you've written Go code, you've very likely used import aliases, even if you didn't know that was the term for them. It's when you have an import line at the top. By default, if you just import a package, the very last element of the package name is how you're going to refer to that stuff for the rest of the module, right? So if it, if it was blah, blah, cluster API /exp blah, blah /API, or v1 beta 1, let's say, was the last part, then throughout the package, by default, you're going to refer to that as v1 beta 1 dot function or constant or whatever. A lot of times that's verbose or collides with something else. You might have two v1 beta 1s, or there's a convention in the code base that we always call this package something else. And so before your import line, you put in an alias. And you've probably all seen these, but if you haven't, it's pretty simple. But the alias can be whatever you want, and it can be different in any module. So there's a linter that says, hey, if you're going to import capz experimental, and you should alias it as the same thing everywhere. Otherwise, people trying to read your code base get unnecessarily confused. And we did some really interesting creative import aliases if you look around the code base. But
We
I
and
don't
everybody
think,
else who's ever written Go, I think.
yeah, because you just make it up and you're like, that works for this module. We did some really funky things like calling, v1 alpha 4, just calling it like v1 in a particular module, because that sort of made logical sense from the point of view of the module. Anyway, it's all standardized now. You might get some linter complaints when you write new code, but I think that's all for the best. And like Jack was saying, this just feels like something Go should enforce on its own, because otherwise the code base kind of spirals a bit out of control in terms of imports. Any questions about that?
Yeah, cool. Thanks so much. Like for me, the thing that I've observed over the years programming in Go is the reason you even use an import alias is because you have a collision, which is by definition very specific to the file that you are using to organize your code in a particular library. And so a particular package is going to collide in a very specific way in a specific file, which is going to inform how you want to alias it, because you want to sort of semantically distinguish it from the thing that it's colliding with, so you can read code in that file and not be confused about what reference goes to what. And then the interesting thing is, if you have a large enough project, that same library in a different file, a different module may collide in a slightly different way, which would sensibly sort of motivate the original author of that code to use an entirely different alias, because in that file there might be a better way to sort of distinguish, no, this is really this package, and those things actually make sense, I think. So the reason that these alias inconsistencies exist are actually usually defensible in my experience. But in the context of an entire code base that's supposed to work together, and when you start becoming an expert in a code base and going from this module to this module to this module, and you're used to sort of referring to a particular external package, it can be very difficult to have to remember in your head, okay, I'm in this library, which refers to this standard package this way. Anyway, I think everybody knows this, but this is a really great thing. Thank you for doing it. It seems like it's going to be, this additional CI is going to be fairly easy to maintain over time. So
yeah, really thanks to Mateus for noticing that it was a problem, because fixing it was totally mechanical and took like an hour. But maybe the take home is the thing I was about to type here. Now, whenever you see like cluster v1 dot something in CAPI or CAPZ, it's always referring to cluster API v1 beta 1. Same thing with exp v1. Those will always refer to the same package. So I think that'll be really helpful for people coming into the project to know what things are. And jumping over to CAPI, it'll be helpful because a lot of the imports will be the same there. Okay, so enough about that, probably. Jack, you want to talk about CSI upgrade tests?
yeah, I don't know what happened to my remaining text matter in that thing. I was going to say this is actually Ashutosh's work, but I just wanted to, in case he or no one else put this down as an agenda, I wanted to talk about it. So Ashutosh, thank you so much for that PR. So do you want to quickly describe that work, because you did the work and you should get all the credit?
Yeah, sure. So this is mostly, CSI upgrade test, because in-tree CSI drivers have kind of been migrated away. And just we need some confidence that when we go to a newer version where in-tree CSI drivers are not there, the upgrade is successful for the existing clusters that is being created via CAPI and CAPC. This has nothing to do with cluster API provider Azure code base, but there is one flag change that is required that I put in the PR description, hopefully. So when we do upgrade to the next version, for example, 1.23, we need to put a flag, otherwise the upgrade will fail. So that's why I thought, it's better to have a CSI upgrade test to make sure Azure CSI drivers, are working fine when we do upgrade. And this will be a short-lived test. Once we are through this version, we can possibly remove this test.
Cool. So I'm not sure what the short-lived aspects, because I think it's useful. The reason I haven't fully LGTM'd approved it is just because it's a large chunk of work trying to tackle a non-trivial. I mean, it's really great what you're doing. It's not easy to do that, and part of me is like, I don't know the exact right way to do this. So I would actually love for permission from the community to ignore that instinct. And because you've done such a good job at triaging all this net new stuff from the existing tests, I feel like there's a good case to be made that we can merge this, keep the test infra coverage at pre-submit, which is to say on demand per PR, as we maybe refine and iterate and figure out the best way to organize and maintain these types of tests in CAPZ. And then when we feel better about that, we can sort of quote unquote promote the test to be a periodic test and get folks to look at it regularly and understand how it works and maybe document the scenarios a little bit more. Does anyone else have any thoughts on, I mean, I think only you and me and Cecile have actually looked at the PR, so probably this is a question for you, Cecile.
Yeah, before Cecile jumps in, I just wanted to put one comment. This is something that's been done in CAPA. And when I say short-lived, this means that, for example, this test is only important when we do upgrade from 1.22 to 1.23. So let's say when we reach at a point where we do not support Kubernetes version 1.22 and 1.23, for further versions, we may not need this test.
Got it.
This upgrade test is actually doing useful things for a particular pair of version.
Cool. I'm not so convinced that the 1.2 to 1.3 upgrade story isn't actually functionally equivalent for, say, 1.2 to 1.6, 7 months from now. So we may want to keep these tests in for longer. I could also imagine a world in which we invest a little time to generalize it so that we can author standard upgrade tests and give it some sort of criteria that says, if you're upgrading from 1.2 to 1.3, use these tests and kind of maintain those, and then have a separate abstraction where we are able to basically say, run the 1.2 to 1.3 upgrade tests. And that way you can provide a model, this PR that you're submitting provides a model for a whole host of back compat validation that we would probably benefit by having in the project. Go ahead, Cecile.
So we do have some upgrade tests right now, like Kubernetes version upgrades. Would it be valuable to add the CSI migration in those, like as Jack is saying, as like a more long-term thing of being able to test arbitrary back compat things instead of having like a separate job that does another upgrade just for CSI migration? Or I guess, are those jobs testing something that's like different enough that it makes sense to keep it separate?
Ashutosh, remind us, what is the significant marker between CAPZ 1.2 and CAPZ 1.3 that is interesting from a CSI driver's perspective. It's like a downstream thing. It's not CAPZ specifically, right?
No, it's not a downstream thing. So, so the important thing here is when we do upgrade from a prior version of Kubernetes from, I mean, a prior one, let's say 1.22 to 1.23, then suddenly in 1.23 CSI Azure disk is disabled from entry, and that means that the existing cluster that got upgraded to 1.23, they need to install the new Azure disk CSI drivers. So the crucial thing is, let's say, if we have a stateful workload that is already using a PVC from the existing entry CSI drivers, that should be working even after the upgrade. And that actually works. But there is a case when we use both cloud provider Azure as well as Azure Disk CSI driver externally. We need to set a flag. And that is required only when we do upgrade from 1.22 to 1.23. And the reason is that one of the old kubelet needs to talk to the cloud provider Azure. And so that's how we just need to set that flag to tell the old kubelet to keep talking to the newer controller manager. There is some communication that needs to be established. So I think I've put that somewhere in the PR description. If not, I'll put that. So that's how it is crucial for 1.22 to 1.23 upgrade. Does that make sense?
Perfectly. I'm sorry I conflated that with CAPZ. So that does make perfect sense. And it also does make Cecile's point very salient. So I'm not as familiar with the current upgrade tests as I could be. The interesting thing that you have incorporated, Ashutosh, with these tests is very particular template scenarios that address the very particular upgrade scenarios you're trying to validate. And Cecile, how do we deal with that particular surface area in our current upgrade tests? How do we choose which types of cluster configurations to run these upgrade tests against? That might be the part that's the most non-trivial in terms of integrations with the existing stuff.
Yeah, we don't right now. It's just a default template, just like a default flavor. It doesn't specify. It basically delegates to CAPI to decide the template. So
yeah, it's really ideally we would be able to set, like, say, the Kubernetes version as the foundational significant bit when we're doing these. Like, say we make a test that's like starts from 122 and validates everything as it relates to upgrading to 123, but that's actually in the real world, that's actually probably not right, because there is no such thing as a 122 Kubernetes cluster. There's a million different types, and different types of clusters have different upgrade gotchas, and they don't, all of the potential gotchas from, say, 122 to 123 or from any other two versions can't always be tested at the same time. Like, you can't just create a big set of all the 122 original configurations and all of the deltas. They're not always going to work together. So you're almost forced into a situation where you have to make it less about the Kubernetes version from this to that, and more about a more sort of vertical scenario, like you've implemented, Ashutosh, with CSI in particular.
So if it helps, the way it's set up right now is there are multiple scenarios. Actually, I'm just remembering this. There are multiple scenarios for upgrades. So there's scale in upgrade, where you delete the control planes before adding new ones. There's regular, and there's HA, I think. And so for that's a test suite, and we basically run that test suite in multiple jobs, one for different Kubernetes versions. So we have like 122 to 123 job, 123 to 124, and each job runs like all upgrade specs. So what we could do is add like a CSI migration upgrade spec, and then say like skip it unless the version is like something that's like relevant. So don't run it for like 120 to 121, but run it from 122 to 123. If that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah,
and
Sure.
I don't know. My main concern
you
is
know,
the template. We'd have to change because we have to change the original cluster configuration to be the one that is Matt, your browser is still sharing, by the way. Yeah. We have to change the template so that, because I think Ashutosh, you've intentionally created a 122 like source template that doesn't have the stuff that 123 needs in order to prove that there's a path forward, right?
Yes, you're right.
Cool. I was sort of interrupting you, so if you want to have your time back, go ahead, please.
No, yeah. So I'll see. I'll see to the code base. Is it like you said to add to the existing upgrade thing? Let's see if we can do something from there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to like ask for a refactor just as your PR is ready and just like waiting for merge. It's just like, Jack suggested, oh, maybe this is something useful long-term to be able to test different features. And yeah, this is not going to be something that's like a one-off that we have to test this like migration, right? Like we probably will want to do this again for out-of-tree cloud provider once that is like GA. And there will be, I'm sure, other Kubernetes things that come that we want to deal with in upgrades.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to explore that and get that going.
Yeah, I would say set an appropriately aggressive time box because you've already spent a bunch of time on this. And I mean, the good news is that the time you spent on this has functionally proven that there's a path forward, and it's literally documented in that PR. So for any other folks in the community who are having this problem, I feel like we have a really good concrete story right now that exists in the public that folks can use to refer to. So that's great. So yeah, please don't spend a week trying to integrate it into the existing upgrade test, but maybe just a quick half hour, 45-minute pass through the existing upgrade surface area. And because you're already familiar with how you did this upgrade, you're better than any of us at being able to assess how viable would this be to integrate into the existing upgrade solutions, or is this going to require an entire refactor of the existing upgrade surface area, in which case I would advocate, and we can see if the rest of the community agrees, that we just merge your PR in the current state, and we can tackle the fact that we have tech debt in our upgrade tests over time and not block the CSI story on that existing tech debt. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you, Jack. That's valuable. Thanks a lot.
Okay, cool. Thanks again. Whatever happens, you've already set a great pattern for a whole host of, my mind's spinning with all the possibilities of getting more test coverage and all these things. Like this is really the value proposition of Cluster API and CAPC. So it's super exciting to think of how we can automate our way towards, demonstrating that value proposition with every PR. Will be super great.
Sure.
Cool. Thanks again, Ashutosh. Anything else to add to that topic? Or any other ones? We're at the end of the agenda here.
I guess within.
Oh, sorry, Zane, you got your hand up.
I think
No, Cecil had it in the hand.
yeah,
Okay.
we were saying the same thing. I was just going to say Zane joined. Maybe we should talk about the machine pool investigation.
Actually, I think if that is probably the investigation is going well. So till we have more data, I think then we can join it. I just wanted to gather some thoughts from here on a slightly bigger topic before I take it to the cluster API, which is around like the how cluster APIs deal with manage Kubernetes clusters, right? So we have like a lot of thoughts going on like on the cluster API, which was built actually like it's my opinion, so please challenge me, for self-managed Kubernetes clusters, right? And we still have a lot of operations that are going on under the hood where cluster API is directly a contender of actually the managed solution, right? So I will put the example of AKS, which is really I have experience with. So AKS team is providing like really good solution in that sense, like let's say around certain operations around the health of the node, removing the node when it's not healthy, draining it, or these other points. And cluster API is actually doing the same, right? So we had this incident, for example, where it's trying to delete the nodes, but I was just imagining what happens if cluster API doesn't delete the nodes, right? Like, and it doesn't happen anything because AKS will come and it will delete the nodes, and like the node ref map will be updated in any case because nodes are deleted. So just from a maturity perspective, like I was asking if it would be sane to go and talk with cluster API to introduce certain flags, like feature flags or not, like to run where certain features are totally disabled because we say this is managed by the managed solution, right? So if the provider type is like AKS or like Azure CAPC managed, just skip all this smartness or intelligence that we have added to the cluster API because we might run into some issues, right? So if someone has some thoughts on that, because I think like the issue that happened, I think we will have more details by the next sync, and because we're still investigating for that. And yeah, just wanted to gather ideas on that approach. Yeah.
So I expect Cecile's thinking something similar to me. There is an existing proposal out to standardize this across cloud providers. Are you aware of that, Zane? My Google Doc. Okay, great. Cecile beat me. Awesome. So in chat, she pasted a PR thread, which links to a proposal. I mean, it's a starting point. It's not going to solve everything, but it's on my to-do list to get a little bit more engaged there. And it's slightly challenging because, as you mentioned, I mean, you are in no small part responsible for the fact that we kind of hit the ground running in CAPZ to prove this whole story out with AKS before CAPI had sort of standardized this in their API spec. So now we have to kind of continue to move that forward for customers who are literally running businesses on top of the solution, while at the same time taking a kind of abstract step back and defining how this is going to look, and then figuring out how we're going to in CAPZ. And does Kappa have an existing thing like we have? Is there an EKS?
Yes. Yeah, they're the ones driving this proposal.
Right. So both providers are going to have to potentially introduce a breaking change on our side in the future once this spec is finalized to properly implement the CAPI blessed managed cluster spec. So super glad you brought this up. I think that we should all engage and to the best that we can make the spec what we want it to be, because it is the right thing to do in the community to eventually adopt that spec. And so we're going to probably do it no matter what. So it should incorporate some of our opinions that we've learned from the last 9 months of actually using it. Cecile, your hand is raised.
Yeah, I think this doc, this proposal, is mostly around basically rethinking things so that EKS can support cluster class. The way that AKS is set up in CAPZ right now, it technically doesn't meet this. We could support cluster class today because we've set it up in a way where it already fulfills the contract. But because of how Kappa set up their managed Kubernetes solution, it doesn't work with cluster class. There's like a major issue. And so they're trying to rethink it. And in rethinking that they kind of came up with like a third option, which is neither what CAPZ or Kappa are doing, as like, this is how we should do managed clusters in Kappa or in cluster API providers. So that's like Jack was saying, that would be like a breaking change down the line. If we decide to adopt this, we don't have to adopt it, but I could see that bringing problems later if we're doing things kind of differently than all other providers. And then, but yeah, regarding like feature flags and like turning off like features of cluster API, I think that would be a separate discussion though, because this discussion is very focused on like the separation of concern between the CRDs and the controllers of a managed cluster, and not so much on like what is actually in the spec and what can be configured. And what you're suggesting kind of sounds like it would be even not like a API change, but maybe like annotations or things that allow to like kind of modify the behavior, because like cluster API has this issue, right, where everything needs to be kind of the lowest denominator of like all the providers, right? So if we say like, oh, cluster API is not going to delete nodes, that might work fine for AKS, but that will potentially be a problem for like some other provider that doesn't delete the nodes. So it's not something that we can just like turn off for everyone, but like I think your idea is interesting. Like it's worth maybe starting an issue about this or discussion of like, can we like have this like these knobs to say like, my provider does this, so I just want to skip this whole part of the controller.
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot to listen. No, I wanted to like, yeah, there's like several approaches that, you know, we could go around. For example, I agree, like cluster APIs, like talking with, you know, like the Kubernetes objects, you know, like with the nodes and everything like that with the Kubernetes clusters, and it works at that level. And like maybe closing certain options will be very hard, and like in that sense, like getting some agreement on that will be like a bigger challenge on that. But I was more thinking also the CAPC is the actual like who is dominating, right? Like what the cluster API can do or cannot do. In the sense, like we are the ones who are generating the kube config for that, right? So if we just take away from that, like saying, okay, you cluster API is not supposed to delete nodes or is not supposed to do this because we agree that AKS will handle all the possible scenarios of that once. That would be one case, right? I agree that would not be the most elegant one because we will see a lot of errors and everything that is happening on the cluster API side. But still, it would be, if someone comes, yeah, like I cannot delete that, then we could say, yeah, this is because you have enabled that feature and that's like opt-in, like this is not by default, right? Okay. I will
Yeah, I don't think that's ideal, like you said, also because like whenever a controller runs into an error, it requeues right away. And so you're gonna have a controller running like the CAPI controller, just like trying to delete the nodes and failing every time. And it's gonna eventually enter like exponential back off, and then it's not gonna reconcile for real for like, and it might get stuck halfway through and not do something that comes afterwards that's like actually critical or important for your machine pool. So I think we can think about maybe putting this in a cluster API context of like skipping things, but I don't know if like taking away the permissions and saying you can't do this, but we're not going to tell you why. I don't think that's necessarily the best approach.
Do you mind if we go a little bit into the weeds? I'm actually more curious about the inverted situation we're describing, because I think the delete situation is actually the easy one. What's more tricky to me is when AKS as an example has a good reason to say recycle 5 nodes in between reconciliation loops. And so now you've got on the CAPI side, you've got say 5 machine pool machines that don't exist anymore. That's fine. I think that association is fairly easy to walk through and garbage collect. But now you've got 5 net new nodes. Is CAPI currently as authored designed to be able to be like, okay, cool, I can make novel associations and add new 5 machine pool machines based on the existing of these 5 new nodes? Is that something you get for free in CAPI right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. These are all things that we should be testing, but yes, great. That's the one that I was gonna so Zane and I have been working on Slack to repro scenarios that you're seeing in the real world. And there's mainly the delete scenarios, what I'm trying to focus on. But eventually I want to, now that I'm in this, I've got this momentum going for testing, I want to be doing these kinds of things, because these are definitely, some of the folks on this call know a little bit about what AKS is working on and experimenting with, and certainly node health, automatic node recycling, all these things are, for folks who aren't using Cluster API, and Cluster API, these are sort of first class principles of Cluster API that folks who use Cluster API take advantage of. And no doubt EKS and AKS and GKE observe these and want to implement these first class conveniences for its customers, independent of Cluster API. But how do you make these things work together, where you have Cluster API managing something that's sort of Cluster API-ish? It'll be interesting and fun. Go ahead, Zane.
Yeah, I think so I was just trying to figure out like some ways to like move forward in sense like more holistic way, because I think I like Cluster API and Cluster API provider Azure, but like there's always going to be like some issues that are like will be beyond Azure, like CAPC, that were introduced by Cluster API, right? And that will affect us. And somehow it might be feel like if I will take a closer look into the cluster class, definitely, and like see if there are like possibilities to design some, like a Cluster API way, which is where the managed clusters like first class citizens in that sense. Because otherwise I've been asked question like if Cluster API is the really choice for managed one, like if we can just use some other platform to, because if AKS is giving us free everything, why not just use like, let's say, Crossplane or everything like that? But I don't see like it's the same thing at all, honestly. It's just like the small details like that are like in that sense like could be adjusted, where we could have like really great like a fleet, like the Kubernetes fleet solution, because I don't see any other product to be able to do that, right? So it should be like a supporting bare metal, like or self-managed and managed, or any Kubernetes cluster that exists out in the world, and to join them under the like umbrella of Cluster API. Because later we are trying to build some things that are like on the life cycle of the cluster, right? So when a cluster is created, I want to do certain things or not, when it's deleted or not. And taking it from the Kubernetes operator patterns, it becomes really like out of the box, like we get it free, right? So this is something that definitely like others don't have right now, and especially like so I'm just trying to find like what would be like the official story, or like stand on that, like how we will make sure that we don't want to overrule AKS, and we want to take profit of all of the feature of AKS, but we also want to use Cluster API because it is like the common ground, call it multi-cloud or multi-hybrid, or like whatever situation someone is dealing with, right? Because no one else will come and provide this cluster interface under Cluster API as it is providing today. But yeah, I will take a look definitely, and come back next time more prepared. Yeah.
You're in a great position to inform how all this turns out. First mover's advantage.
Yeah. Any other discussion about that? I mean, it does seem like there's a kind of an impedance mismatch there, as you've been pointing out. On the other hand, everybody's voting with their feet and wants to use AKS, so this is where the action is.
Yeah, like Zane was sort of suggesting, I think clearly right now in 2022, whatever year it is right now, the distribution of value between fleet management and managed cluster, all the fleet managed stuff, or almost all of it, is you need Cluster API for that right now. That may start to shift over. AKS and EKS may start absorbing some of those features as they observe how Kubernetes customers that they're in touch with manage clusters at scale. And so potentially the balance will shift, and cluster API intrinsically will have sort of less and less value proposition over what's intrinsic in the platforms themselves 2 or 3 years from now. That's possible. In which case cluster API may become just additional complexity that doesn't justify itself, so to speak. But certainly that's not the case now. And so, yeah, we're super happy to be working with you, Zane, and other customers who want to do this. Like we really are we have the opportunity to solve these problems for the first time and hopefully get them right, because now is the time to get them right.
I think like I also really appreciate all the bug fixings and all the like eyes on that, because that's basically like it really helps us to move forward and not to go back to Terraform era. So I really appreciate that, like being able to run on operators. Yeah.
Cool. All right. That's all we had on the agenda. William, I see you showed up a little bit after our introduce new people thing. Do you want to say hi really quick, or you want to do that next time?
Yeah, sure. I can do a quick intro right now.
Cool.
All right. Yeah. So hi, I'm William, or Willie. I just joined Microsoft this week, and I'm really looking forward to working with Cluster API and CapZ, and still kind of feeling my way around and on the onboarding process. But I do want to sit into all of these meetings and get a better feel for CapZ in general. So yeah, nice to meet everyone.
Awesome. Welcome. Thanks for making it to the early West Coast meeting. Maybe we'll change the time a little bit. We'll try.
No problem. Yeah, I need to get used to getting up earlier anyway. So.
Cool. I guess that's it for this time, unless anybody has a last minute comment. All righty. Thanks for coming. We'll see you here again in 2 weeks.
Sure. I just wanted to, Jack, sorry, like I was not able to unmute myself.
No worries.
So Jack, I just updated the PR a bit for the part that I was speaking about what extra needs to be done in terms of flag and PR description. Sorry, I didn't had put that. And also I linked a similar PR that was done in Kappa on that PR, and then I'll look with Cecil's suggestion how to integrate with the existing ones, and then also I think it will be a good idea to raise a commit in the PR for a potential document. So please take a look at that, and we can chat more on Slack.
Sounds awesome. And Matt, that is Ashutosh. So you can just copy and paste that up into the prior. You got it. But thank you so much for taking notes.
I'll fix my notes just a minute.
That's it. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.
See you, everyone.
Um,